You are on HOA, Karen gets denied. The wheel lift was already under the tire. I pulled into my driveway after a 12-hour shift and found a tow truck backing toward my car. Karen yelled that my vehicle was unlisted and therefore not allowed to exist here. She had a megaphone in one hand and her phone in the other, already recording. Your file says repeat offender. That was the first thing she said to me. I had not even gotten out of my truck yet. I work as a park ranger, which means I value quiet and rules that make sense, and nothing about this made sense. I live in Copper Canyon Estates in Kirkland, Washington, and the HOA here treats neighbors like suspects after dark. I had parked on the street the night before because my driveway was blocked by a delivery, and apparently that was enough to trigger a full mobilization. Carol Clark stepped closer, still holding the megaphone even though we were 10 feet apart. She chairs the social committee, which in this neighborhood means she spreads rumors and pretends it is governance. The tow driver stayed in his cab, engine idling, watching us through the side mirror like he was waiting for someone to throw a punch. I need you to step back, I said. That is my car, and you do not have authority to tow it. Carol raised the megaphone again. I have every authority. You violated the street parking ban. Overnight vehicles are prohibited under Section 12 of the Covenant. If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA. I recognized that line. She had said it at the last quarterly meeting when someone asked for a grace period on landscaping violations. It was her favorite threat, and she delivered it with the kind of smugness that comes from never being challenged. The tow driver finally opened his door and stepped down, clipboard in hand. He had a bright warning tag clipped to his belt, the kind they slap on windshields before a tow. He looked at me, then at Carol, then back at me. She says you are dangerous, he said. I am not touching this unless a cop tells me to. That was the side complication I did not see coming. Carol had poisoned the well before I even knew there was a dispute. I pulled out my phone and opened the HOA portal. My vehicle was registered. I had submitted the form 3 months ago when I moved in, and I had the confirmation email. I showed the driver the screen. He squinted at it, then shrugged. She has the authorization placard, he said. Magnetic mount. HOA issued. That is all I need unless you have a court order. Carol smiled. She had a stack of orange cones strapped together with a clip hanging from her shoulder, and she set them down in a neat row, blocking the street side of my driveway. The cones were not HOA property. They were the kind you buy at a hardware store. But she used them like they were official equipment. The weather was turning. Clouds pressed low and gray, and the first gust of wind rattled the cones. A storm was coming, and Carol looked like she wanted to stand there and watch me get soaked. I took a breath and kept my voice level. I need to see the violation notice. You cannot authorize a tow without documentation. Carol pulled a folded paper from her jacket pocket and held it up without handing it over. I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes. There it was. The boomerang line. I made a mental note, because that sentence was going to matter later. The tow driver checked his watch. Lady, I have 3 more calls tonight. Either he moves the car or I hook it. I do not get paid to referee. That was the time pressure. The tow company did not care about the dispute, and they were not going to wait. If I did not move fast, my car was going on the truck, and getting it back would cost me $600 in fees I was saving for something important. I had been putting money aside for new camping gear for work, and the HOA was trying to drain me with bogus fees before I could even settle in. I stepped between the driver and my car. I am not moving until I see a signed authorization from the HOA board president, not the social committee chair. The president. Carol raised the megaphone again, and this time she held it right at my face. The plastic cone was close enough that I could see the manufacturer logo on the rim. I flinched back, and she laughed. You do not get to make demands, she said through the speaker. You are a repeat offender. Your file has 3 violations in 3 months. I had lived here 3 months. The math did not even make sense. But Carol did not care about math. She cared about control. A neighbor across the street opened their blinds. I could see them peeking through, watching like this was a show. That was the witness type in this neighborhood. People watched, but nobody intervened unless you gave them a reason to pick a side. The driver unhooked the wheel lift chain and let it drop. The hook swung low, close enough to my front wheel that I heard the scrape of metal on asphalt. He was not hooking the car yet, but he was making it clear he could. I pulled out my phone again and opened the camera. I need this on record. If you tow my car without proper authorization, I am filing a complaint with the tow company and the county. Carol stepped into the frame. Good, film it. I want everyone to see what happens when someone thinks the rules do not apply to them. The driver looked uncomfortable now. He did not want to be on camera, and he did not want to be part of a legal mess. But he also did not want to lose the tow fee. He tapped the authorization placard on the side of his truck. "This is legit," he said. "HOA contract. If you have a problem, take it up with them." I already knew the answer, but I asked anyway. "Who signed the contract?" The driver checked his clipboard. Carol Clark. Social committee. That was the first crack. Social committee chairs do not have signing authority for vendor contracts. Only the board president or the treasurer can authorize towing. Carol had overstepped, and she had done it in a way that left a paper trail. I looked at the driver. "Check with your dispatch. Confirm that Carol Clark has authority to issue tow orders. I will wait." He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. Carol tried to interrupt, but he held up a hand. Dispatch confirmed contracts, and if there was a question, he did not want to be the one holding the liability. The call took 2 minutes. The driver listened, said a few words I could not hear, then hung up. He looked at Carol. "Dispatch says the contract is under the treasurer's name. You are not on the authorization list." Carol's face went red. "That is a clerical error. I have full authority under emergency provisions." The driver shook his head. "Not my problem. I am not hooking it without the right signature. You want this towed? Get the treasurer out here." He climbed back into the truck, started the engine, and pulled away. The wheel lift dragged sparks on the pavement as he turned the corner. Carol stood in my driveway, still holding the megaphone, looking like she had just watched her favorite toy get taken away. I did not say anything. I just picked up my coffee cup from the hood of my car and walked inside. The neighbor across the street let the blinds drop. The next morning, I woke up to a notice taped to my front door. It was printed on HOA letterhead, and it had Carol's signature at the bottom. The notice said my vehicle registration was incomplete and that I owed $250 in administrative fees for the attempted tow, plus another $100 for emergency enforcement response. I took a picture of the notice and checked the HOA portal again. My registration was still active. Nothing had changed. Carol was inventing violations to justify the fees. I called the HOA management company. The woman on the phone was polite, but not helpful. She confirmed that my vehicle was registered and that the fee was not standard. She also confirmed that Carol did not have authority to issue administrative fees without board approval. But she could not do anything about it unless I filed a formal dispute, which would take 30 days to process. I did not have 30 days. Carol had made it clear she was going to escalate, and I needed to get ahead of it. I started gathering evidence. I pulled my vehicle registration confirmation, the email trail with the management company, and screenshots of the HOA portal showing my active status. I also pulled the covenant section Carol had cited. Section 12 prohibited overnight street parking, but it included an exception for registered vehicles during driveway obstructions, which was exactly my situation. Then I reached out to my ally. His name was Dan, and he was a former HOA board member who had resigned 2 years ago after Carol tried to push through a rule requiring pre-approval for guest vehicles. He had told me the story at a neighborhood barbecue a month after I moved in, and he had warned me that Carol ran the social committee like a private police force with no authority. Dan agreed to meet me at a coffee shop that afternoon. He brought a folder full of old board meeting minutes, and he walked me through Carol's pattern. She had tried the same towing stunt on 3 other homeowners in the past year. 2 of them had paid the fees to make it go away. The third had fought it and won, but only after spending $800 on a lawyer. She has been escalating since the board gave her the social committee chair, Dan said. She thinks it makes her untouchable. But she does not have signing authority, and she knows it. The problem is the board president does not want the fight, so he lets her get away with it. I asked him if he would be willing to testify at a hearing. He nodded. I will do better than that. I will get you witness statements from the other homeowners she targeted. Same-day photos, same lighting, same tactics. If you can get this in front of the full board, they will not be able to ignore it. That was the evidence type I needed. Witness statements with same-day photos and identical lighting. It was not just my word against Carol's. It was a pattern, documented and repeatable. I spent the next week building the case. I contacted the other homeowners Dan had mentioned. 2 of them were willing to go on record. One of them, a woman named Angela, had taken video of Carol blocking her driveway with cones and threatening to call the tow company if she did not pay a guest parking fee. The video was date-stamped and clear. Carol's voice was unmistakable, and she used the same line. If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA. I requested a hearing with the HOA board. The management company scheduled it for 3 weeks out, which was longer than I wanted, but still within the dispute window. I also filed a formal complaint with the tow company, citing the authorization issue and requesting a copy of their contract with the HOA. The company sent it over within 2 days. The contract was signed by the treasurer, not Carol, and it included a clause requiring written board approval for each tow. Carol did not have that approval. She had issued the tow order on her own authority, using the magnetic placard as a prop to make it look official. I waited for the right audience, because the reveal needed witnesses. 2 days before the hearing, the escalation hit. I came home to find the gate access system glitching. My keycard would not work, and the gate arm stayed down no matter how many times I swiped. I called the management company, and they said my access had been flagged for review due to outstanding violations. Carol had triggered the gate lock. It was a feature the HOA used for delinquent accounts, but my account was not delinquent. She had manually flagged it, and the system had automatically disabled my access. I parked outside the gate and walked in. The gate attendant, a contractor who worked weekday afternoons, recognized me and let me through. He also told me Carol had been by earlier that day asking if my vehicle was on the restricted list. She is trying to build a case, he said. I would watch her back. The next morning, I found a contractor's truck in my driveway. 2 men in high-visibility vests were measuring the distance between my fence and the property line. They said they were sent by the HOA to check for safety code violations. I asked to see the work order. It was signed by Carol and labeled Emergency Safety Inspection. I told them to stop. They did not have permission to be on my property, and the HOA did not have authority to send contractors without notice. One of them shrugged and said they were just following orders. I took pictures of the truck, the work order, and the men's faces. Then I called the management company again. This time, the woman on the phone sounded worried. She confirmed that no safety inspection had been authorized by the board, and she said she would contact Carol immediately. I asked her to put it in writing. She agreed. That was the second escalation step. Carol was not just targeting my car anymore. She was trying to alter something on my property without permission under the excuse of safety. It was harassment, and it was starting to look like a deliberate campaign to force me out or bankrupt me with fees. The hearing was scheduled for 6 in the evening at the HOA clubhouse. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder full of documents, a tablet loaded with Angela's video, and a printed copy of the tow company contract. Dan was already there, along with Angela and the other homeowner who had agreed to testify. Carol was sitting in the front row, arms crossed, looking like she owned the room. The board president, a man named Greg, opened the meeting with the standard procedural language. Then he asked me to present my case. I started with the vehicle registration. I showed the confirmation email, the portal screenshot, and the covenant section Carol had cited. I explained that I had been legally parked during a driveway obstruction and that the tow order had been issued without proper authorization. Greg looked at Carol. Is that accurate? Carol leaned forward. He is twisting the rules. Overnight parking is prohibited, period. The obstruction clause is for emergencies, not convenience. I pulled out the tow company contract and handed it to Greg. Section 4. All tow orders require written board approval. Carol issued the order without approval, and she used a magnetic placard to make it look official. Greg read the section, then looked at Carol again. Did you have board approval? Carol hesitated. I acted under emergency provisions. There are no emergency provisions in the contract, I said. And even if there were, this was not an emergency. This was retaliation. That was when I played Angela's video. The board watched in silence as Carol blocked Angela's driveway, threatened a tow, and used the same line about mercy and moving. The date stamp matched the timeline I had presented. The lighting was identical. The tactics were identical. Dan stood up and added his testimony. He outlined Carol's pattern over the past 2 years, and he confirmed that she had been escalating enforcement actions without board oversight. He also noted that 2 homeowners had paid fees to avoid the fight, which suggested Carol was using the threat of towing as a revenue generator. Greg looked uncomfortable. The treasurer, a woman named Linda, looked furious. She asked Carol directly if she had been issuing tow orders without approval. Carol tried to deflect. I was protecting the community. Rules exist for a reason. Linda cut her off. You do not have signing authority. You never did. And you have been using HOA resources to run a personal enforcement campaign. The board went into a brief recess. When they came back, Greg read a prepared statement. The board was suspending all pending violations related to my vehicle, refunding the tow and immobilization fees, and clearing my ledger. They were also launching an internal review of Carol's actions as social committee chair. Carol stood up, face red, and tried to interrupt. The board voted anyway. It was unanimous. But I was not done. I had been holding the trump card, and this was the moment to deploy it. I pulled out a printed HOA insurance document I had requested through a public records request. It showed that the association's liability coverage included a harassment claims exclusion. If a homeowner filed a harassment claim and won, the HOA would be personally liable for damages because the insurance would not cover it. I handed the document to Greg and quoted Carol's own words back to her. I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes. That is what you said when you issued the tow order. And according to this document, your pattern of harassment puts the entire HOA at risk because our insurance will not cover claims like this. Greg read the document, then looked at the board attorney, who had been sitting quietly in the corner. The attorney nodded. This is accurate. If a homeowner files a harassment claim and demonstrates a pattern, the association is exposed. We would be personally liable, and the board members could be individually sued. Linda turned to Carol. You need to resign. Now. Carol tried to argue, but the board was done. Greg called for a motion to remove her from the social committee. It passed 4-0, with 1 abstention. Carol grabbed her bag and walked out, still muttering about rules and authority. The hearing ended with Greg apologizing to me and confirming that the board would issue a fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive for Carol. He also said they would be reviewing all of Carol's enforcement actions over the past 2 years to identify other potential violations. I walked out of the clubhouse with Dan and Angela. The sky was clear now, and the parking lot was half empty. Angela shook my hand. You did what I could not, she said. Thank you. Dan clapped me on the shoulder. Carol's been running this place like her own fiefdom for 2 years. You just ended it. The fallout continued over the next 2 weeks. The HOA attorney withdrew from representing Carol in any personal capacity, and he put it in writing. The board panicked because they had to answer homeowners with no cover, and they started scrambling to distance themselves from her decisions. 3 other homeowners came forward with complaints about Carol's enforcement tactics, and the board launched a formal audit of the social committee's budget. Carol's timeline was proven false with timestamps. The gate access log showed she had manually flagged my account the same day I requested the hearing, which meant she was retaliating in real time. The contractor work order was traced back to a vendor Carol had hired without board approval, and the vendor confirmed she had paid them out of the social committee discretionary fund, which was supposed to be used for neighborhood events. The board refunded the tow and immobilization fees and cleared the ledger. They also issued a community-wide notice clarifying the vehicle registration process and confirming that only the treasurer and board president had authority to authorize towing. I got my fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive. Carol was not allowed to contact me directly, and any further complaints had to go through the management company with board oversight. 2 months later, the board held a special election to replace Carol. A retired teacher named Patricia won, and her first act was to disband the social committee and fold its responsibilities back into the main board. She also pushed through a policy requiring written board approval for all vendor contracts and enforcement actions. The neighborhood settled down. The gate access system was fixed, and my key card worked again. The contractor never came back. The tow company updated their contract to require explicit board authorization for every tow, and they added a clause allowing homeowners to dispute orders directly with dispatch. I kept the insurance document in a folder on my desk, just in case, but I did not need it again. Carol moved out of Copper Canyon Estates 6 months later, and the house sold within 2 weeks. The new owners were quiet and kept to themselves. Dan stopped by a few weeks after Carol left. He brought a six-pack, and we sat on my porch watching the sunset. He told me the board had apologized to the other homeowners Carol had targeted, and that 2 of them had gotten refunds for fees they had paid under duress. "You changed the culture here," Dan said. "People are not afraid to push back anymore." I raised my beer. I just wanted to park my car without getting ambushed by someone with a megaphone. Dan laughed. "Well, you did that, and you made sure nobody else has to deal with it either." The neighborhood was quieter now. The rules still existed, but they were enforced evenly and with actual board oversight. Nobody was running a private police force, and nobody was threatening tows for parking violations that did not exist. It felt like a place where I could actually live without looking over my shoulder every time I pulled into my driveway. I finished my beer and looked out at the street. The cones were gone. The tow trucks were gone. Carol was gone. All that was left was a neighborhood that finally felt like a community instead of a surveillance state. I thought about the coffee cup I had been holding that first morning, the one I grabbed on my way out the door when I heard the tow truck backing up. I still used it every day. It reminded me that sometimes the best defense is just showing up prepared and refusing to back down when someone tries to bulldoze you with fake authority and a megaphone. The HOA sent me a formal apology letter a month later. It was signed by Greg and Linda, and it included a line about the board's commitment to fair enforcement and homeowner rights. I filed it with the rest of the documents, right next to the insurance policy and the tow company contract. I never heard from Carol again. The no-contact directive held, and the management company confirmed she had not filed any complaints or attempted to reach out. She was gone, and the neighborhood was better for it. I kept working my shifts at the park, coming home to a driveway I could actually use without worrying about ambush enforcement. The gate worked. The contractors stayed away. The neighbors stopped peeking through their blinds because there was nothing left to watch. It was over. The towing war had ended, and I had won by doing exactly what Carol never expected. I followed the rules, gathered the evidence, and forced the system to apply its own standards evenly. No vandalism, no fraud, no revenge. Just paperwork, timestamps, and a willingness to stand in a driveway and refuse to move when someone tried to tow my car without proper authorization. The best part was knowing that Carol's own words had been her downfall. "I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes." That line had come back to bite her harder than anything I could have planned. She had handed me the leverage, and I had used it at exactly the right moment with exactly the right audience. Dan was right. I had changed the culture. But more than that, I had proven that even in a place like Copper Canyon Estates, where the HOA treated neighbors like suspects, You could fight back and win if you were willing to do the work. I raised my coffee cup to the empty street and smiled. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next HOA story.